The Trump admin says the Alien Enemies Act expulsions were due to delicate talks with El Salvador's Bukele. I can't ever say his name. The U.S. quietly handed over a top MS-13 leader with insider knowledge of Bukele's corruption. There's an international fascist. There's a fascist international. We need to wake the fuck up. All right, let's talk. Let's watch this new video. It's the liberalism to fascism pipeline. We're not going to get to the Elon Musk's daughter interview today. Whoops. Honestly, I probably won't even cover it, to be honest. Now that I think about it, I don't know really what I can offer other than just like doing a react with Hassan on the screen. Like, I don't really feel like that I can offer much. I think it's been covered enough, is what I'm saying.
We got a lot of work to do. Americans are being squeezed out of the labor force and their jobs.
Anarchism is not about the removal of all hierarchies in society. It's the removal of unjustifiable hierarchies. Why is this always misrepresented online? Because every single individual has a different opinion about what's unjustifiable hierarchy or not. And so it becomes a circle jerk of individualist opinion as opposed to a workable political project. I think, for example, that children should have bedtimes. Some anarchists think that children, that is an unjustifiable hierarchy, and children shouldn't have bedtimes. They should go to bed when they want to go to sleep. You know, like, and who's right?
Jobs are taken. But all over the world, they're coming into our country from Africa, from Asia. And you know who's being hurt the most by millions of people pouring into our country? The black population and the Hispanic population. The crime is going to be tremendous. The unions are suffering because of it. They're poisoning the blood of our country. That's what they've done.
You would think that at a time when economic stratification and marginalization are running rampant, a time where the rich grow richer at the expense of everyone else, politicians would tailor their rhetoric to tackle the real issues at hand and not just stir division amongst races, genders, creeds, and religions. But no. Why do figures like Donald Trump point the finger at immigrants as though they are the reason for economic instability and not oligarchs? Will he ever mention the fact that in 2022 alone, undocumented migrants paid nearly $100 billion in tax revenue while being shut out of the very programs they helped fund? Why is the blame for a failing economic model rarely placed on the model itself, but instead transferred to groups who are already having a hard enough time? Why does this economic instability lead to divisive in-group, out-group rhetoric and not toward a productive discussion about the innate instability of the economic model we live under? I hope I can answer that question by the end of this video. But first, we have to go back in time just a bit. In the aftermath of the Second World War, Western governments and economists alike were scratching their heads trying to come up with economic reforms that would prevent a calamity like the war they just endured from ever occurring again. The Great Depression still lingered in the minds of many, with unregulated capitalism widely seen as its cause and an unstable economic model. Western governments didn't want to scrap capitalism altogether, but they believed that by guaranteeing their populations basic dignities and social safety nets, it would prevent them from entertaining alternative economic and political ideas. Keep in mind, it was the disillusionment and suffering of the German citizenry post-World War I that allowed for Hitler's rhetoric and ideas to flourish. By preventing that level of economic instability from occurring again, Western governments believed that they could prevent fascism from gaining traction in the future. They also wished to prevent socialist or communist sentiment from strengthening. It's important to note that post-World War II, the socialist bloc was guaranteeing employment, healthcare, and housing to its citizens. If the capitalist West didn't try to appease its populations in a similar way, it feared that revolutionary leftist movements would flourish, and in the eyes of many liberals, fascism and socialism are totally the same level of evil. One for one. And that brings us to this dude, John Maynard Keynes. Keynes was an economist who stressed the demand side. To put it very simply, he believed that when people have more money to spend, especially workers who make up most consumers, it drives demand, keeps businesses running, and helps the economy stay healthy. And when that doesn't happen naturally, he argued, the government should step in to boost spending and keep things moving. Think of it as a kinder form of capitalism that Keynes was advocating for.
I don't really think this is a good explanation of what Keynes was saying. I don't think this is a good explanation of what Keynes was saying. Keynes was basically saying was an understanding of the economy where economic recessions were periods where the perspective of the markets was that further growth was disfavored and that you were not going to have sufficient demand to keep up with supply. So everybody starts doing what he called the paradox of thrift. If you think that people are not going to spend money, then you stop investing and expanding your business. And when you stop investing and expanding your business, all the people that you would have given money to expand their business have to cut back on their business. And it causes a paradox of thrift. So as everybody starts to save money, then less and less people have work. And the economy starts to collapse, and assets start to get devalued, which is going to make further investment make less sense, and you get a spiral of a recession where more and more people are starting to save money, less and less people are consuming, less and less expansion equals more and more people who lose their jobs equals a demand deficit. And so what the government should do is when it looks like there's a public recession happening in the public economy, the government should step in and provide counter-cyclical spending. So if factories are not buying concrete to expand, well, we should use that opportunity to buy the concrete to build roads and bridges and subways and public facilities. Because there's less demand, the government should step in and provide a floor and start spending money in the economy. It should run deficits, because when the economy is in recession, interest rates decline. So it's cheap for the government to borrow money already. It's even cheaper in a recession. And so when there's a lag of demand, the government should step in and do counter-cyclical spending to prop up the economy and then get people back to feeling optimistic again that the economy was going to grow. So the private economy starts investing again, right? Like the concrete company will start investing concrete production when it knows the government's going to buy a bunch of concrete to build roads and bridges, right? So they start hiring people and from unemployment, they start investing in expanding their concrete factories, and then bam, before you know it, there's an expansion of the economy. That's what Keynes is basically saying, which is counter-cyclical spending is the best way to recover from recessions. There's a very cringe song that I used to play because it would piss people off, and it's very funny. It's called the Econ Rap, the most cringe thing ever created by right-wingers in the history of anything.
One designed to prevent catastrophes like
I love making people watch this because it's so bad. It's from right-wingers, and I love it. Although their description of Keynes is not inaccurate.
Low interest rates. It's the animal spirit. You see, it's all about spending. Hear the register cha-ching. Circular flow, the dough is everything. So if that flow is getting low, doesn't matter the reason. We need more government spending. Now it's stimulus season, so forget about saving. Get it straight out of your head. Like I said, in the long run, we're all dead. Savings is destruction, that's the paradox of thrift. Don't keep money in your pocket or that growth will never lift, because business is driven by the animal spirits, the bull and the bear, and there's reasons to fear its effects on capital investment, income, and growth. That's why the state should fill the gap with stimulus, both the monetary and the fiscal. They're equally correct. Public works, digging ditches, war has the same effect. Even a broken window helps the glass man have some wealth, the multiplier driving higher the economy's health. And if the central bank's interest rate policy tanks, a liquidity trap, that new money stuck in the banks, deficits could be the cure you've been looking for. Let the spending soar now that you know the score. My general theories made quite an impression. Revolution. I transformed the econ profession. You know me, modesty, still I'm taking a bow. So say it loud and say it proud, we're all Keynesians now. We've been going back and forth.
Oh, no. What's the other thing? There's another part which I like. Maybe it's the second econ rap. Oh yeah, the second econ rap. There's another one that's better. This one's better. Hold on. They're both terrible. I love how bad these are. Like, I can feel people cringing right now.
Let's listen to the beats changing high and going down.
Jobs are a means, not the ends in themselves.
This is
People
the right
work
way.
to live better, to put food on the shelves. Real growth means production of what people demand. That's entrepreneurship, not your central plan.
My solution is simple and easy to handle. It's spending that matters. Why's that such a scandal? Money sloshes through the pipes and the sluices, revitalizing the economy's juices. It's just like an engine that's stalled and gone dark. To bring it to life, we need a quick spark. Spending's the lifeblood that gets the flow going. Where it goes doesn't matter. Just get spending
You'll
flowing.
see slack in some sectors as a general glut, but some sectors are healthy, only some in a rut. So spending's not free, that's the heart of the matter. Too much is wasted as cronies get fatter. The economy's not a car, there's no engine to stall. No expert can fix it, there's no it at all. The economy's us, we don't need a mechanic. Put away the wrenches, the economy's organic.
Which way should we choose? More bottom up or more top down? The fight continues.
This is so bad.
Gazing high in second round. It's time to win. More from the top or from the ground. Let's listen to the beats changing high and going
So
down.
what would you do to help those unemployed? This is the question you seem to avoid. When we're in a mess, would you have us just wait, doing nothing until markets equilibrate?
I don't want to do nothing, there's plenty to do. The question I ponder is who plans for whom? Do I plan for myself or leave it to you? I want plans by the many, not by the few. Let's not repeat what created our troubles. I want real growth, not a series of bubbles. Stop bailing out losers, let prices work. If we don't try to steer them, they won't go berserk.
Come on, are you kidding? Don't Wall Street gyrations challenge a worldview of self-regulation? Even you must admit that the lesson we've learned is more oversights needed or else we'll get burned.
Oversight? The government's long been in bed with those Wall Street execs and the firms that they've led. Capitalism's about profit and loss. You bail at the losers, there's no end to the cost. The lesson I've learned is how little we know. The world is complex, not some circular flow. The economy's not a classic and master in college. To think otherwise is the pretense of knowledge.
Which way should we
By the way, chat, this is what conservatives think. Conservatives think like, no, you can't plan anything. Meanwhile, the fastest growth of the history of the humanity has been in China in the last 15 years since this video was made. And now the entire Western world is panicking because the US is being totally usurped. Why? Because they actually did master the economy. They did plan things. They did government intervention. They did actually do industrial policy. And it raised the standard of living of the Chinese people faster than any other place in the history of humanity. And like, that's the thing where it's like, oh, fuck, wait, maybe Keynes was wrong. Maybe Hayek was wrong.
The world to fail in a on your high horse.
It's time to win.
By the way, this video was made in the Great Recession where conservatives were like, no, we shouldn't do anything. We should just let the economy be in recession for years.
From the crowd. Let's listen to the beats changing high and going
You
down.
get on your high horse and you're off to the races. I look at the world on a case-by-case basis. When people are suffering, I roll up my sleeves and do what I can to cure our disease. The future's uncertain, our outlooks are frail. That's why free markets are so prone to fail. In a volatile world, we need more discretion, so state intervention can counter depression.
People aren't chessmen you move on a board at your whim, their dreams and desires ignored. With political incentives, discretion's a joke. Those dials are twisting, just mirrors and smoke. We need stable rules and real market prices, so prosperity emerges and cuts short the crisis. Give us a chance so we can discover the most valuable ways to serve one another.
Which way should we?
Like 8 minutes. 8 minutes. Ah, I'm so sorry for making you listen to that. But anyway, the point is that Keynes is not just like nicer capitalism. It's a way of analyzing capitalism where you evaluate how capitalism actually operates and what do liberals believe should be done to counter recession and depression. It's not about it being nice. It's about capitalism without government intervention is inherently unstable and prone to severe fluctuations, stagnations, crashes, and we should create regimes that try to smooth that out.
Like the Great Depression and
watched it already.
the economically downtrodden from revolting against their governments. After the Second World War in the 40s and 50s, Keynesian economics began to rise to prominence. Western governments embraced Keynes's ideas and enacted policies that built the foundation for what we now call social democracies. They were done with unfettered...
I don't really think that's correct either, honestly. I would say that social democracy is part of a long tradition on the left of attempting to provide reformist transitions to a post-capitalist economy. And oftentimes Keynesians and social democrats lined up politically but it's not really the case that social democracy equals Keynes.
Capitalism, and knew that a mixed social democratic type model was the way to not only keep their populations happier, but keep both fascism and socialism at bay. Because again, those two things are totally morally equivalent, one for one. Now, I have my issues with social democracy. We'll get into that later in this video, but one thing that's for certain is that the social democratic model was an improvement to the unregulated capitalist hellscape that preceded it. As the Western world continued to embrace Keynesian economics and shift toward social democracies, there was a very notable man who was just not fucking with it. This guy, Friedrich Hayek. Hayek was an Austrian economist who believed that an overemphasis on collectivism would fast-track a society to totalitarianism. He believed that social democracy and expansive welfare states would erode the individual and eventually morph into authoritarianism. In 1944, Hayek published a book called The Road to Serfdom, in which he made his argument, and it did not take long before this book of his was picked up by business communities and wealthy, powerful people who saw his ideas as a way to champion a reversal of the Keynesian era. While Keynesian economics improved financial stability for the average person, the ultra-rich resented it because it limited their ability to maximize profits. The business communities and the ultra-rich saw in Hayek's ideas a chance to reverse labor protections, taxes, regulations, and usher the world back into an era where unfettered capitalism ruled supreme. An era where they could grow their wealth exponentially without having to worry about who or what they exploited. But convincing the world of an ideology that is objectively dog shit just because it would be friendly to the rich and powerful wasn't easy. This was going to take a lot of money and resources, so rich, moneyed interests immediately got to work promoting Hayek's book. DeWitt Wallace, the anti-communist editor and founder of Reader's Digest, published a condensed version of Hayek's book in an attempt to make his ideas more digestible for casual readers. 1 million reprints were ordered, many of which were at the requests of companies trying to indoctrinate their workers. Look magazine adapted Hayek's book into a cartoon which was distributed by General Motors to its workers, and Hayek was being booked for well-paying speaking gigs in America so his ideas could be propagated further. In 1947,
disgusting.
Hayek went on to found the Mont Pelerin Society, which was an organization where he and other like-minded individuals...
People are like, what would you... If you had a time machine, Mike, would you go back and kill Hitler? And I'm like, nah, dude, I'd go to the Mont Pelerin Society and clean it up.
Went on to promote his theories of free market, deregulated capitalism. The ideas propagated by Hayek and his organization have come to be referred to as Neoliberalism, and this doctrine of his was financially backed by some of the richest, most powerful interests on Earth. Forces such as the Koch brothers, William Volcker & Co., General Electric, DuPont, and many, many more. They saw in Hayek's neoliberalism a way to liberate themselves from the regulations and responsibilities that Keynesianism imposed on them. Now, neoliberalism as a term in the modern day tends to be used mostly as a pejorative by people critical of the ideology, but it absolutely still is a real and pervasive parasitic force.
It's not a parasitic force. It is the dominant ideology of the Republican and Democratic parties. Like when you vote for Kamala Harris, you're voting for neoliberalism. When you vote for Donald Trump, you're voting for neoliberalism. Like that's the reality. Now, Donald Trump is actually if you took Donald Trump and Kamala Harris and said, who is more heterodox toward neoliberalism? The answer right now would be Donald Trump. Now, it's not from a position of a good position. His position is this kind of like mercantilist. He wants to enact this mercantilist Gilded Age. You know, he wants to go back where America orients itself economically the same way the British oriented itself toward its empire in the 19th century. He's a throwback. He's a reactionary.
To define it can be tricky, but here are a few attempts that I think do a good job. Historian David Harvey says, neoliberalism is a theory of political economic practices that proposes that human well-being can best be advanced by liberating individual entrepreneurial freedoms and skills within an institutional framework characterized by strong private property rights, free markets, and free trade. The role of the state is to create and preserve an institutional framework appropriate to such practices. The state has to guarantee, by force if need be, the proper functioning of markets. If markets do not exist in areas such as land, water, education, healthcare, social security, or environmental pollution, then they must be created by state action if necessary. But beyond these tasks, the state should not venture. Deregulation, privatization, and withdrawal of the state from many areas of social provision have been all too common. George Monbiot and Peter Hutchison define neoliberalism as an ideology whose central belief is that competition is the defining feature of humankind. It tells us that
neoliberalism without tariffs? Did you not hear what I just said? What do you think I said? What I said, he's got a heterodox economic policy that is evocative of mercantilism of the 19th century and the Gilded Age.
greedy and selfish, but that greed and selfishness light the path to social improvement, generating the wealth that will eventually enrich us all. It casts us as consumers rather than citizens.
I got big words. Everything I said means something. Everything I said is packed with information. If you don't know what the words mean, then you can ask me like, hey, Mike, what do you mean by mercantilism? Hey, Mike, what do you mean by Gilded Age? Hey, Mike, what do you mean by that? That's fine. Don't ask me a question that I literally already answered because you don't know what the words mean. Just ask for more remedial explanation. Just be like, I don't really get what you mean by mercantilism or Gilded Age. And it'd be like, well, what he wants to do, what I mean by Gilded Age is he wants to empower the rich and corporations to operate their businesses in America without reference to environmental regulation, labor law, labor unions, or child labor. He wants to increase the exploitation of the American worker and concentrate wealth and power into fewer and fewer hands. That's what I call Gilded Age. Mercantilism. He wants to basically treat the global market as places to exploit raw materials. He wants to extract raw materials from Africa and then import them in the United States, where we will create the finished products under that Gilded Age regime, right? And then we will export and we'll dominate the foreign markets and we'll export to them without tariffs, right? Into their domestic market. So we will we'll have a net trade surplus for the rest of the world. We will provide finished goods and they will provide us raw resources. That's similar to the mercantilist trade regime that the empires had in the 19th century. So he wants to change us from this like post-industrial service economy where we, things are manufactured abroad and then we exchange financial capital, right? So why is that different from today? Well, today Americans don't produce shit. We produce debt. We produce money. And it's because we're the global reserve currency, other countries demand dollars. So dollars are stronger than they otherwise would. So American citizens can buy foreign products with US dollars and get those products cheaply here in the US. However, the problem is that the forwarders have dollars now, and they have to take those dollars and buy American dollar-denominated assets. So they buy up our stock market, they buy up our real estate, they buy up our assets in the US. So you'll see a huge bubble in asset prices that people making, labor income, we can't compete. We can't buy a house because it's foreigners who are coming in to buy assets with our dollars because of that trade imbalance and because of the global reserve currency. So when they transact trade with us, they're not buying anything from Americans, right? We don't produce anything for them to buy. The only thing they have to buy are our financial and other assets. And that causes bubbles in asset prices. So if you're a rich guy and you own a lot of assets, this system's great. You get cheap products from abroad that are high quality. You own a lot of assets, so your net worth is growing faster than inflation, and so you're getting richer. And so the wealthy people in cities have loved the neoliberal system because it's made them way better off. But if you're a laborer in America, especially in places like Pennsylvania or Michigan, where they were wealthy because they used to be the hearts of American industrialism, and as deindustrialization has occurred, it's hollowed out the economies of those places. So people that used to make good wages with good union jobs and have benefits and be able to afford the American dream can no longer do that. So people have been forced to relocate to the few large cities on the coasts, and people have been forced to go to college and try to grab a high quality service job or a white collar job. But now there's so much demand and there's so much competition for those places because there's some of the few places where you could actually live a dignified life, and so prices are absolutely out of control. So even people that make good salaries, they can't afford to live in places like Los Angeles. How the fuck can you afford a home? Even if you're making $200,000 a year, can you afford the average home? The answer is probably not. So we have a system that has completely failed to provide for the average or even the above average citizen in this country. I'm sorry for going off on a rant here, but I'm trying to explain how the systems interlock. And what Trump is trying to do is he's trying to basically rebalance trade and bring manufacturing back to the U.S. and get us back into a more mercantilist, exploitative way to lower the price of assets. This is why he's crashing the economy. I legitimately do believe that Giannis Varoufakis got it right. I think Donald Trump is doing something that people don't expect. And the thing is, why is he doing this? Why not keep going with the neoliberal shit that has already existed? Well, the answer is America is weak. The answer is America is fundamentally weak. Donald Trump is not wrong. America is fucked. We can't produce housing. We can't produce manufactured goods. We're weak militarily. We can't produce artillery shells. We are a weak paper tiger. And the only thing we have going for us is our control over the financial system internationally. We are on the verge of being supplanted by China. China is superior to us in all the things that matter in a war. Manpower, productive capability, shipbuilding, they have more men under arms. They have more people to recruit. They have better cities, better infrastructure. There's a lot of ways that they would beat our ass sideways in a war. All right. So the United States is fundamentally weak and cannot compete. And they're worried about that. And so they're trying to do a last ditch effort to reshore manufacturing so the US could actually compete with China. But it's already too late.
It seeks to persuade us that our well-being is best realized not through political choice, but through economic choice, specifically buying and selling. It promises us that by buying and selling, we can discover a natural meritocratic hierarchy of winners and losers. The market, it contends, will, if left to its own devices, determine who deserves to succeed and who does not. The talented and hardworking will prevail, whereas the feckless, weak, and incompetent will fail. The wealth the winners generate will trickle down to enrich the rest. Neoliberals argue that an active state seeking to change social outcomes through public spending and social programs rewards failure, fuels dependency, and subsidizes the losers. The role of governments, neoliberals claim, should be to eliminate the obstacles that prevent the discovery of the natural hierarchy. Put very simply, neoliberalism is the ideology that clears the way for unfettered capitalism to rule supreme. As you can probably tell, this is the perfect ideology for the ultra-rich to get behind because not only does it frame financial success as purely meritocratic, but it also paints monetary gain as some sort of moral accomplishment that the state should by no means interfere with, even if that gain is achieved through exploitation or injustice. It treats the market as a wholly infallible force that rewards the strong and worthy, while ignoring the fact that markets are indifferent to human suffering. Since this market fundamentalism is a key component of the ideology, markets are often forced into sectors where they shouldn't be. This ideology, in an almost Calvinist sense, allows for the rich and powerful to reframe their opulence and greed as moral and just. It allows corporate interests to ignore those pesky market externalities, to forget about the pollution and exploitation their operations create, because if the free market rewards them with riches, then they must be on the right path. No wonder the ruling class jumped at the opportunity to push Hayek's ideas. But again, they were faced with the obstacle of democracy. Neoliberalism, to most normal people, is not a very enticing ideology, and they sure as shit wouldn't vote for it if they knew what it was.
Despite the millions of dollars that went into promoting the ideas of Hayek and his cohort,
Keynesian economics remained as the mainstream economic consensus, but that was soon to change. The neoliberals knew that it would be hard to implement their policies domestically without first testing them out abroad, and the country that they set their sights on was Chile. Throughout the Cold War, the US government was very involved in Chile. They did not want it to turn communist, and they did everything they could to exert economic and political influence over it. The US even brought Chilean university students to America to study economics at the University of Chicago because it had a reputation for being anti-left. This operation came to be known as the Chile Project, and as author Naomi Klein put it, the goal of the Chile Project was to produce ideological warriors who would win the battle of ideas against Latin America's
Why do you think Trump won't succeed in his New World Vision? Is it because it's too late? He's also dumb. He's also a piece of shit. Like, he's not sophisticated enough. I think Bernie Sanders would have succeeded in this project of rejuvenating the U.S. And I think Donald Trump can't. Because he's so offensive that people are not going to want to align with the United States. They're going to want to build alternate institutions because he's just so unlikable that politically it's not going to be popular to align with Trump. And you can see that in places like Canada right now, where like the conservative movement was going to win a landslide, and then they became associated with Trump, and Trump said he wanted to invade Canada, and so the conservative movement just blew up. Now they have a fucking banker who's gonna like win in Canada for like the 4th election in a row because Trump is so unlikable to American allies. So the alignment's not going to work because people are going to be looking for alternative systems because he's doing dumb shit like threatening Panama, threatening Denmark, threatening Canada, threatening Mexico. Who sane would align with the United States? And the United States is doing a genocide in Gaza. So everybody around the world, whether they're in the global south or in the developed world, they could see how the United States is treating its allies. It's how it treats people that it thinks it has power over. And they're like, we got to check this guy. We can't align with these people. We have to check them. We have to develop our alternative institutions. We have to arm up. We have to create a unified European military. The Chinese, maybe we should cooperate with them. Like, people are just going to reject that face. Now, if it was Bernie Sanders, then it would have been another 100 years of American power. The reality is that Bernie Sanders and AOC are the only people that can save American power. Just like FDR is the only person who could save America from collapsing. AOC and Bernie are the only people that could save American power. That is reality. That is the truth. Because for the United States to be saved, it needs massive redistribution of economic power and wealth. It needs massive internal investment. It needs to have a more peaceful foreign policy. That's the only way the United States could actually continue to maintain the preeminent power in the world. But they're not going to do that. So, GG. Like, the United States needed to be willing to go from hyperpower to superpower. But the United States is not doing that. So, it's over. Stop funding Sam Reich celebs. They're essentially laundering and wasting your funds. Hassan and streamers have a stronghold on it. Hassan and streamers team up on Discord. Hassan is corrupt. Hassan protects streamers. Their fans are on their whim. Hassan and streamers have a stronghold on the industry. Fuck Hassan. Nah, that's not really true. I wish it were. I wish it were. You seem like kind of like a schizo. So I'm going to go ahead and ban you because you seem like a schizophrenic person. So I'm not going to keep an insane person in my chat. But what I will say is this. I wish that were the case. I literally wish that were the case. But it's not.
Pink economists. As this battle was taking place on the ideological front,
So if Trump is so unlikable, how would Trump be able to enable global fascism? Because America is still the most powerful country in the world? Do you think a Dem Neolib admin would be able to enable fascism? I mean, I don't think there's going to be another. I mean, like, I don't think the Democrats can win another election, presidential election. They might be able to, like, grab the House, but I think it's very unlikely the Democrats are going to be able to, like, actually win power that doesn't immediately swing out of their hands again, because they can't do anything, and they're not even attempting to do anything. So dissatisfaction is going to keep rising because the system is unstable. So even if the Democrats did win power again from another thermostatic effect in 4 years, they're not going to be able to wield it effectively to do anything to enhance American power because they don't believe in doing anything. Like, the only way that this country could be saved as a superpower, as the predominant power in the world, is if through a Green New Deal and massive, massive, massive restructuring of our economy. They just don't have it in them.
Chile in 1970 had elected a socialist leader, which was not gonna fly with the Americans. The US spent millions of dollars and used every available resource to destabilize Chile and create the conditions for a coup. They wanted that pesky leftist out so they could replace him with someone else and test out neoliberalism. In 1973, that wish came true. Chile's Marxist president was overthrown and replaced by a military junta, which eventually consolidated under the rule of Augusto Pinochet. Pinochet was a brutal dictator whose fascistic regime was marked by mass murder, torture, sexual violence, kidnappings, and the persecution of leftists. He rid the country of any socialist or Marxist influence, and in the eyes of the Americans, he was the perfect man to implement neoliberalism in Chile. Those same students who studied economics at the University of Chicago were now fully equipped to return home and put their lessons of mass privatization, deregulation, and market fundamentalism into practice. University of Chicago professor Milton Friedman played a key role in indoctrinating these young men, and he was also a prominent member of Hayek's Mont Pelerin Society. Remember that? As the years passed under Pinochet's brutal dictatorship, Chile's wealthy elite thrived, along with American corporations which were free to exploit Chilean resources without the threat of nationalization or government regulation. Pinochet allowed them to operate without restrictions, and if the Chilean population had a problem with that, he would kill or torture them into compliance. Nothing was to get in the way of the almighty invisible hand of the free market. Friedrich Hayek even had this to say about Pinochet's Chile: "My personal preference leans toward a liberal dictatorship rather than toward a democratic government devoid of liberalism."
By the way, the road of serfdom, by the way, road to serfdom is when we have a dictatorship of fascists. That's when you're truly free.
Need I remind you, this fucking guy built his entire career by fear-mongering about how welfare programs were a slippery slope to tyranny. But as soon as he was faced with a tyrannical despot who just so happened to promote his economics, suddenly all that talk about freedom and liberty wasn't so convenient, and he didn't mind a dictatorship all too much, as long as it was, quote, a liberal one. Unlike the corporatist blend of state and business seen in fascist regimes of old, such as Mussolini's Italy, Pinochet's regime maintained the hyper-militaristic, ultra-nationalist authoritarianism intrinsic to fascism, but repurposed the state to clear the way for corporate dominance. This model has laid the groundwork for what some have referred to as neoliberal fascism. Which brings me to one of the main points of this video. Free market economics and fascistic regimes are not mutually exclusive. As we can see, fascistic despots like Pinochet were propped up solely to protect capital, exploit labor, and enforce what Hayek would call liberalism. By that point, Hayek had distanced himself from the term neoliberalism due to its negative connotations and just went with liberalism or classical liberalism. So now that the Chile project was complete and neoliberalism was proven to treat the ruling class quite well, It was time to bring it home to the West in the forms of Reaganism in the US and Thatcherism in the UK. I should note that neoliberal policies did technically start up under Carter, which is why some people say Reaganism came before Reagan, but it wasn't until Ronald came around that the full ferocity of neoliberalism would be unleashed in the US. I think we all know what Reaganism is: the heavy emphasis on supply-side economics, mass privatizations, deregulations, attacks on labor protections, and the whole neoliberal 9 yards. A similar set of policies was enacted in Britain under Thatcher when she privatized the railways and other public utilities, implemented the poll tax, sold off public housing to private interests, privatized the prison system, and so on. These economic reforms, by prioritizing the business communities and the rich, we were told, would deliver a tide that would lift all boats. But in reality, to quote David Harvey, neither Britain nor the US achieved high levels of economic performance in the 80s, suggesting that neoliberalism was not the answer to the capitalists' prayers. To be sure, inflation was brought down and interest rates fell, but this was all purchased at the expense of high rates of unemployment, averaging 7.5% in the US during the Reagan years, and more than 10% in Thatcher's Britain. Cutbacks in state welfare and infrastructural expenditures diminished the quality of life for many. The overall result was an awkward mix of low growth and increasing income inequality. But none of that actually mattered, because the real goal in both instances was to facilitate the transfer of wealth from the bottom to the top. The relentless privatizations and the creation of markets any and everywhere did the trick. One aspect of this neoliberal transformation that often gets ignored is the think tanks funded by dark money that actually come up with these policies that then get handed to governments. To quote Monbiot and Hutchison, we've discovered that the Koch brothers, two of the richest people in human history, developed an entire network of think tanks to lobby for extreme neoliberalism. In Reagan's case, the mandate for leadership was a 3,000-page document written by the Heritage Foundation, the same force behind today's Project 2025, that was given to Reagan and entailed thousands of policy prescriptions that ranged from mass privatizations, the scaling back of welfare programs, massive tax cuts for the rich, and so on. We begin to see how this ideology, heavily funded by the ultra-rich, serves the ultra-rich without any concern for democracy. The more governments deregulate, privatize, and implement neoliberal policies, the richer the ruling class becomes, and the more they can exert their influence over politicians and governments. In capitalist democracies, money serves as voting power. The more of it you have, the more of the vote share you effectively control. Neoliberalism seeks to break the chains that restrict unfettered capitalism, and as a result, it breeds plutocrats and oligarchs, not democracy. It's very easy to point the finger at Reagan and Thatcher, but the idea that it started and stopped with them distracts us from the fact that the same plutocratic forces behind their administrations are still around today, and they don't just back conservatives or Republicans. Everyone is a neoliberal now. Some of the most grotesque displays of neoliberalism often come from Democrats, Canadian Liberals, UK Labour, and similar parties. From Bill Clinton's repeal of FDR's Glass-Steagall Act, legislation
Steagall. It's Glass-Steagall. 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 Glass-Steagall.
designed to regulate the financial sector, the revocation of which played a role in the 2008 financial crash, to Tony Blair taking a neoliberal hatchet to the UK's beloved National Health Service, these displays of neoliberalism should not go unmentioned. And this brings me back to the question I asked at the start of this video. Why is it that instead of blaming the neoliberals running our failing economic system, the blame always gets dumped on marginalized groups? And the answer is simple. Because when we're conditioned to believe that hard work guarantees success, that the so-called winners and overachievers will naturally rise and reap the rewards, it's a lot easier to scapegoat an outgroup when that promise falls apart than to question the system itself. It's reassuring to believe that all we need to do to live a fruitful life is work hard. But those who were told to work hard did work hard, and oftentimes found the results underwhelming. This creates an opening for fascistic, divisive rhetoric and strongmen to rise to power. We saw this with Trump, who blamed everything on immigrants and the swamp, but once he was in office, he did nothing but serve the same corporate interests. He slashed taxes for the wealthy, he boasts a horrendous anti-labor record, and on his last day of his first presidential term, he rescinded Executive Order 13770, lifting restrictions that had made it more difficult for government officials to transition between public office and the private sector, particularly in terms of lobbying. After all that talk about draining the swamp, we were left with an even more corrupt corporate shill who used populist rhetoric to stoke hatred and distract us from the real enemy: Neoliberalism. If you think this video is going to end with me calling for a return to Keynesian economics or a push towards social democracy, then you would be mistaken. Social democracy would undoubtedly improve the lives of many people living within it, but it does not adequately address the underlying issue. It's still capitalism, and therefore it is still animated by the profit motive and not human well-being. If we look back at the era where Keynesian economics ruled supreme, say in the US for instance, yes, the quality of life domestically was better. However, it's very easy to forget the fact that
Is there examples of outright neoliberal fascism being implemented domestically, like what's happening now in the U.S.? Yes. Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Latin America in general. What's another good example of it? I think Franco is a good example in Spain. I mean, the shock doctrine of Eastern Europe after the fall of the wall, like you've seen, and every example, pretty much without exception, it was pretty bad.
Of life was paid for with the blood and sweat of the developing world. Capitalism, fundamentally, is a system founded on colonial looting and the transformation of natural resources into private property. As President Eisenhower was blessing his
resources only, I want to correct it because this is like degrowth or pablum. Resources are only resources because of human effort. Like copper ore that's like 500 feet under the ground is not a resource. It's just a rock. It just is. It only becomes a resource when it becomes exploited by human beings, and we can actually use it to improve human society. Up until that point, it's just a thing in nature. There are asteroids that are solid gold that contain 10 times as much gold than human beings have ever mined that are floating around in our fucking solar system right now. Did you know that? Like there's solid platinum fucking asteroids that are just floating out in space. Like right here, there is a asteroid. There is a 2,000 foot wide platinum rich asteroid dipped within 1.09 million miles of the Earth yesterday, prompting renewed speculation about the feasibility of space mining. Roughly the size of the rock of Gibraltar, the asteroid at its nearest point was only 4.6 times the distance from Earth to the moon. In celestial terms, this was a very close encounter. There's $50 billion of platinum in it, supposedly. Now, they're not going to actually go and do anything, but the point is that was just a random asteroid. There's plenty of asteroids that have far more resources than we could ever mine in the history, like we'd ever pull out of the Earth, that are just floating around in space. But they're not resources until we actually can use them for something.
Population with a 91% top marginal tax rate and a 52% corporate tax rate, his administration was overthrowing democratically elected leaders in Guatemala, Iran, and more, just to turn those countries into outposts where American interests could siphon away the wealth and exploit the labor and resources. So yes, although he was taxing the rich domestically and funding social programs, we often forget about all the exploitation abroad that Keynesianism or social democracies not only fail to address, but oftentimes thrive off of. Social democracy is essentially a compromise. It occurs when a capitalist state, often through tripartite negotiations, brings labor and capital together to strike a deal while emphasizing social programs and safety nets. The issue with this is that capital is still the force with all the real political pull. If capitalists decide to claw back,
I mean, like, I agree with this. However, I don't think it necessarily has to be the case, right? Like, let's imagine that you have a really militant, robust trade union movement that seizes state power through elections and withstands the assault on the state that the counter-revolutionary forces would almost certainly begin. And it developed a program to, like, nationalize industry and usurp the capitalists, right? If you have state power, if you have control of the state and you repurpose it and you could resist the efforts to overturn it, I don't see why you couldn't implement some sort of revolutionary economic project, right, through that kind of program. I don't think it necessarily is right to say this kind of conclusion. I feel like this is ahistorical and anti-scientific, to be honest. Like, I hear a lot of people say it, and I'm not saying that it's wrong, for sure wrong, but I think it's a little bit too conclusory and a little bit too like, yeah, no, if you have like a robust militant trade unionist movement that seizes state power, then the capitalists will always remain in control. And it's like, I don't know about that. I don't think that follows. I think there are examples of that. There are failed transitions, like like in Sweden, but it doesn't necessarily, like, it's describing something that is and saying that is the essence of it. And I think there's plenty of examples in history where one thing actually did change into another thing after fits and starts. It's a dogmatic point, and I don't like it. I don't think it's very well reasoned or argued.
Back workers' gains because their margins are looking a little thin, the state will have to side with them or else risk things like capital strikes. In practice,
yes, okay, capital strikes will happen, and then you fight back. Same thing if you did a revolution. There would be a counter-revolution. That's called battles. Like, you think, like, there is no way to do things clean. I want people to know that. That's what I'm basically trying to inform you. You can't do history clean.
Social democracies are still beholden to private interests. We can see in some of the Nordic countries today this very phenomenon occurring. Sweden is clawing back a lot of its social democratic policies and spiking on the Gini coefficient, a measure of income inequality. So, although social democracies are preferable to neoliberalism, and although I consider social democrats friends of mine, I think we can do a little better. Social democracy, at the end of the day, is still capitalism. The plunder of the third world will be and has been at the heart of the capitalist mode of production for centuries. All the neoliberal era did was bring some of that exploitation back home. When I talk about liberalism leading to fascism, it's not because I think all the ideas from liberal thinkers or the Enlightenment era are bad. I don't. Concepts like empiricism, anti-dogmatism, rationality, and freedom are great. However, the economic model that emerged from the Enlightenment era was capitalism, which I believe jeopardizes the very principles I just mentioned. Whether it takes the form of Keynesian liberalism, where the majority of the burden is placed on the developing world, or neoliberalism, where that suffering makes its way back home, the embrace of capitalism by liberals will lead to the demise of the very ideals of freedom and democracy they claim to uphold. We've seen this in Pinochet's Chile, where the interests of capital were protected by violence. We've seen it during the Reagan-Thatcher era, where the will of moneyed interests began to brazenly take priority over the will of the majority. It's not what a healthy democracy is supposed to look like.
Pretty good video. I like Overzealots. I like his stuff overall, even if I have like minor quibbles. I need to like learn how to make videos like this, honestly. Like, instead of like criticizing, I need to do. It was a banger. Which reminds me, chat, we have another TikToker about how USAID created Islamic fundamentalism. I don't want America to do bad. My point is that you and I are not benefiting from America doing bad in Saudi Arabia. You and I are not doing better from all the interventions and covert wars we're fighting. And when you're talking about international Islamist terrorism, you know what the source of that is? Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states. We're propping up the governments that are literally funding the Islamism that you say is an existential threat. If we get the out of the Middle East and we stop propping up these states, maybe the Islamist movement will lose a little bit of steam. From U.S., the ABCs of Jihad, March 22nd, 2002. In the twilight of the Cold War, the United States spent millions of dollars to supply Afghan school children with textbooks filled with violent images and militant Islamic teachings, part of a covert attempt to spur resistance to the Soviet occupation. The primers, which were filled with talk of jihad, it features drawings of guns, bullets, soldiers, and mines, have served since then as the Afghan school system's core curriculum. Even the Taliban used the American-produced books. The textbooks were developed in the early 80s under an USAID grant to the University of Nebraska, Omaha, and its Center for Afghanistan Studies. The agency spent $51 million on the university's education programs in Afghanistan. Officials said private humanitarian groups paid for continued reprintings during the Taliban years. Hey, there's USAID again. So the United States literally created Islamism to fight what? Leftism. You're pretending like, oh, these guys are, this is guys, they're inferior culture. I'm Asmongold. I think they're, oh, wait, well, it turns out it was written in Nebraska, so the USAID grant. Why are you saying America bad? And like, I think this is important to understand is like, when I say literally created, I don't mean that there were no fundamentalist Islamic sects prior to the United States hijacking it for political purposes. I'm saying that the Islamism, the violent Islamism that we see, the international Islamist terrorism was produced by the United States and the U.S. intelligence services and promoted and propped up and supported and propagandized for as an alternative to what? Secular pan-Arab nationalism. That's the reality. All right, chat. So go like that, comment on that. I think that's, I'm going to call it today. We went over 5 hours. You're welcome. I started late, but then I went late. Damn, Hazana's live, you're down so many views. What? I've been streaming for 6 hours of politics. I'm still like the top political streamer. Been live for Hazan for like 3 hours. What the fuck are you talking about? Hey, Mike, I wanted to hear your thoughts on the common side effects from Friday. I will check that out. Just send it in the news content. Thank you, everybody, for hanging out. I'll see you all tomorrow. Thank you for the 876 subs.